Every Memorial Day, the media talks about slain U.S. service members as heroes. And that makes sense. What so many did was heroic. I talked about this when I was on CNN. The people who get the most heroic treatment from the media are those who fought in World War II. On Memorial Day, Veterans Day, and at times throughout the year, we are told of their achievements. Like, here are clips from 3 different reports on NPR.
Tad Nagaki was an American hero, and I can never say enough thank yous.
How did your dad deal with his status as a hero, a hero of the greatest battle of the Pacific?
Doris Dory Miller was one of the first American heroes of World War II.
But if we take a step back and look at the big picture of what today's media is doing, then we can immediately see how hypocritical these reports are. Here's what the media should stop to really think about on Memorial Day and throughout the year. I do all the time. What did these folks risk their lives for? The ones we remember on Memorial Day, what did they die for? It wasn't just to protect the United States, it was to protect the United States as a free and democratic nation. It was to protect freedom and democracy. In preparing for this episode, I found something that is so powerful and resonant for us all to hear. It's a speech from FDR in 1940, a year before Pearl Harbor. He was talking about the threats to democracy and why it was so important to support other democracies as they fought off evil attacks from anti-democratic regimes. It says so much today about threats to democracy here at home, about the importance of Ukraine and Israel decisively winning their wars that they're in after they were attacked by anti-democratic forces. It speaks to the fact that there are people in the United States cloaking their anti-democratic agendas under alleged anti-war sentiments. The threats to democracy here and around the world are profound, but the media is fueling anti-democratic movements by hiding the truth from you. There's also something big about these heroes that today's media never mention or address, which might be the ultimate sign of hypocrisy on this topic. If folks in the media truly understand that those who fought in World War II were heroes, it's time to understand what they fought for, what made them heroes. Memorial Day isn't just about remembering, it's about honoring them. The media's lip service to them in between reports that fuel anti-democratic forces, those do not honor these heroes. But, and they stand corrected, today, you and I will. Plus, words from another president warning us about the military-industrial complex and emphasizing the role of a free press. Powerful reminders of what any U.S. leader should understand. Also, some really beautiful Memorial Day music for you, including a moving performance by one service member standing alone in a huge national cemetery. And a patriotic message from me to you, along with reasons to celebrate. All that and more coming up today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. Josh Lebs here. It is so great to have you joining me here on They Stand Corrected, the podcast that fact-checks the news and exposes the systemic problems that are preventing today's media from doing the job, which is to get you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and to stand as stalwart defenders of democracy. With each episode, I send out a newsletter packed with links and more information, videos, images, all kinds of things. I encourage you to sign up for it. You can find the link in the show notes, or it's on something called Substack. Just search for They Stand Corrected. Or just go to my website, joshlebs.com, JOSHLEVS.com. There are listeners around the world, and if you're living in a democracy, then what I'm talking about here today applies to you as well. Actually, I just saw from Substack that there are now people who subscribe in 22 countries and 48 states. Hey, folks, on this patriotic holiday, maybe we can close the gap there. The two where no one has subscribed yet are Wyoming and North Dakota. So send this podcast and the newsletter to, well, everyone you've ever met and even people you haven't. But be especially sure to include folks in those two states. The newsletter is free, but there's a bunch of extra content for people who become paid subscribers. I count on you to make this show possible. And because it's Memorial Day, the rates are low and at an especially, how to put this, patriotic, symbolic level. You will see that. All right, enough business. Let's jump in. This problem has always struck me since my days on NPR and CNN, how the media talks about U.S. soldiers and other service members and thanks them for their service and often describes them as heroes, but seems completely oblivious to the stakes of what they fought for and how it's up to us in every generation to carry on the legacy, to keep fighting for what they fought for. Fighting in the public square, fighting through language, fighting by rejecting anti-democratic movements and ideas from all sides, the far left and the far right. I went and looked at what the president was saying before the United States got involved in World War II. This was a powerful talk. It was called a fireside chat from FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. These were in the days when people would gather around the radio to listen to this. In 1940, he was pushing for the country to support nations in Europe as they tried to fend off the Nazis. He made clear how vital it was for the United States to equip these countries in their battles.
The history of recent years proves that the shootings and the chains and the concentration camps are not simply the trenchant tools, but the very altars of modern dictatorships. They may talk of a new order in the world, but what they have in mind is only a revival of the oldest and the worst tyranny. In that, there is no liberty, no religion, no hope. The proposed new order is the very opposite of a United States of Europe or a United States of Asia. It is not a government based upon the consent of the governed. It is not a union of ordinary, self-respecting men and women to protect themselves and their freedom and their dignity from oppression. It is an unholy alliance of power and pelf to dominate and to enslave the human race.
I was so struck when I listened to that because that description could largely apply to anti-democratic forces of today as well. Russia fought against the Nazis in World War II, but then under communist rule was an authoritarian nightmare that killed millions of people. Now Russia has been trying to overtake Ukraine and extend its powers. And there's Iran, the epicenter of global Islamist terrorism. Iran supports Hamas, which launched the most evil terrorist massacre of modern times against Israel, like Ukraine, a democracy. Iran also supports Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other groups. The media stopped talking about this because it doesn't fit their narrative, but Iran was behind an attack that killed 3 U.S. soldiers at a base in Jordan last year, and more than 40 others were wounded. I shared figures with you here on this show from a group called Fondapol. They found that between 2001 and 2012, there were more than 8,000 Islamist terrorist attacks worldwide, comprising a small slice of all attacks. But in the following years, from 2013 to 2024, the number exploded. More than 56,000 attacks, comprising 86% of attacks worldwide. Don't worry about all those numbers, by the way. If you want them, you'll find them in the newsletter. What matters here is the big picture. Islamist terrorist attacks are happening all the time. They're designed to subjugate people, to prevent them from speaking up, to prevent elections, to get rid of any shred of democracy. All of this threatens the United States. If Russia takes over Ukraine, it gets even more powerful and threatens European and U.S. hegemony. Iran and Islamist terrorist groups worldwide have the United States in their sights. You hear it all the time. Death to Israel, death to America. The terrorist attack in New Orleans last New Year's Eve that killed 14 people and wounded another 57, according to the latest reports I saw, that was carried out by an Islamist terrorist. And these crazy people on college campuses are supporting jihad, which is exactly what those terrorist attacks are. FDR spoke in 1940 about why it was so important to support fights to protect democracy overseas.
The people of Europe who are defending themselves do not ask us to do their fighting. They ask us for the implements of war, the planes, the tanks, the guns, the freighters, which will enable them to fight for their liberty and for our security. Emphatically, we must get these weapons to them. Get them to them in sufficient volume and quickly enough so that we and our children will be saved the agony and suffering of war, which others have had to endure.
Now, I'll emphasize, FDR did not do everything right. He turned away Jewish refugees. He put Japanese people into internment camps. This is not about whitewashing his history, but on this, the importance of fighting for democracy, he spoke eloquently. Here is the part that gave this talk its title, The Arsenal of Democracy.
We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself. We must apply ourselves to our task with the same resolution, the same sense of urgency, the same spirit of patriotism and sacrifice as we would show were we at war.
FDR also talked about how there were people in the United States trying to prevent America from supporting democracies under attack. As you listen to this, think of the people here today making these types of arguments.
They try to reawaken long slumbering racial and religious enmities which should have no place in this country. They are active in every group that promotes intolerance. They exploit for their own ends our own natural abhorrence of war. These trouble breeders have but one purpose. It is to divide our people, to divide them into hostile groups, and to destroy our unity and shatter our will to defend ourselves. Some of them even suggest that we should imitate the methods of the dictatorships. But Americans never can and never will do that.
Oh boy, I heard that and I was like, if only he knew where we would be 85 years later, fighting against authoritarian instincts from a president who has talked about his admiration of dictators. One more part of this speech serves as a reality check for everyone today, particularly the media, about what it takes to defeat evil. That, plus I'll tell you about my visit to the site where Hitler had those hellish propaganda rallies immortalized in old Riefenstahl films. That's coming up.
This is an absolutely amazing podcast. Josh Levs is a treasure and a wonderful source of information.
I just wanted to thank you for They Stand Corrected. It's just fantastic. Thank you for these tools and for your incredible work here.
If you are not listening to They Stand Corrected weekly, then you are doing yourself a disservice. Never before has a podcast like this been so necessary. Josh, keep up the good work.
I absolutely love your podcast.
I love what you're doing to prevent the democracy demolition of 24/7 toxic disinformation.
It's a highlight of my week every time it comes out because I know I'm going to learn something. You have made me a much more educated consumer of news.
Thank you so much to everyone sending in messages like this. To find out how you can do the same, get in touch. There's a form that's free and available to anyone to fill out. It's linked in the show notes. As I record this, a lot of people are still reeling from the murder of a young couple in Washington, D.C., who worked for the Israeli embassy. I wrote about this in my newsletter and in a column for the Times of Israel. I wrote about the fact that I am not shocked. The hatred behind this movement has been fueled by the media for years. This is Intifada. This is what this hate movement has been calling for. It is an anti-democratic movement based on lies. And that's not new. In the 1930s and the 1940s, there were people around the world, including right here in the United States, who thought the Nazis were the good guys. You know, they were socialists, National Socialists. But the people who understood the truth, the facts, knew better. They saw what was going on. And this is something I talked about in a previous episode. They regretted not having taken much stronger action against Germany after World War I, because the failure to take those stronger actions allowed Nazism to grow, metastasize. In 1940, when FDR was doing this fireside chat, he understood that Nazism had to be defeated. People calling for appeasement and ceasefire deals, these kinds of things, were wrong. Those don't work.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis. No man can tame a tiger into a kitten by stroking it. There can be no appeasement with ruthlessness.
Of course, a year later, Pearl Harbor happened and the United States entered the war. But even before that, this speech shows FDR understood the only way to defeat Nazism is to actually defeat it fully. Russia should be defeated now in Ukraine so that it sees it cannot go take over a neighboring democracy. Hamas must be defeated and dismantled thoroughly to show that Islamist terrorism against a democracy will not be rewarded, will not be allowed. The version of Islamist terrorism that emerged in the 20th century, as I've reported here, is based on a mix of two things. Centuries of Muslim attacks against Jews, the people of Israel, people of Judea, and Nazism. I went into this in episode 44. I shared this clip from author David Dallion. You'll hear a reference in here to Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem.
The alliance between Adolf Hitler and the Muslim fundamentalist world was actually initiated and forged by the Grand Mufti at the very beginning of the new Nazi regime. Several of the Arab political parties founded during the 1930s were modeled after the Nazi Party. This is often forgotten by historians.
He goes into how Nazi materials, including Mein Kampf, were distributed widely and treated as fact throughout the Arab and Muslim world, and how later Palestinian leaders were trained on these ideologies. And here's a talk from Edwin Black, another author. He wrote a book called The Farhud, Roots of the Arab-Nazi Alliance in the Holocaust.
A group of people that were dwelling in a land for 2,600 years, the Jews of Mesopotamia, of Iraq, 1,000 years before Muhammad, came to be considered vermin, Untermenschen, which is German for subhuman. The alliance went into the battlefield. The Muslim forces of the Third Reich were Waffen-SS units dispatched all over Europe.
The World War II heroes the media talks about, they fought these folks. They fought these Islamists. This is historic fact. Has any news agency told you this? Almost surely not, because big mainstream news organizations are portraying the modern versions of these groups as these poor, downtrodden innocents who are victims of big bad bombings by a democracy. The hypocrisy here is off the charts. Journalists keep talking about the heroism of the military in World War II. Well, millions of civilians were killed in that war. In bombing Germany, the Allied forces killed hundreds of thousands of civilians, including tons of children. I visited Nuremberg on a journalism program. I went to the stadium that you may have seen in Triumph of the Will, a Nazi propaganda movie from hell. It's now a modern soccer stadium in a democracy, which is kind of the ultimate FU to Hitler and the Nazis. While I was in Nuremberg, I saw numerous sites that were destroyed in bombings by Allied forces. Here is a clip from a talk I gave this past October 7th.
And when I was standing there, I imagined a beautiful Aryan child, 3 years old, maybe, looking to the sky and seeing bombs fall, and that being the last thing this Aryan child ever saw. It is sick and depraved what humanity does. It's so awful. And none of that makes what the Allied forces did anything less than heroic. They were fighting against Nazism. They were responding to this horror. In my work as a journalist, I have covered death tolls and tried to fact check death tolls in wars all over the world. Wars with hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths in just the past 5 years, and some of them still raging right now. You don't hear about it. But what do you hear? Big bad Israel, big bad Jew. It's literally the only place in which previous places that I worked at, NPR and CNN, source a terrorist group's figures as fact.
You can hear the full speech in episode 27. There's a video, too, actually. You can see that in the newsletter. In the wake of World War II, democracy took off around the world. West Germany and eventually Germany became a democracy. India was founded as a democracy in 1950. In the Middle East, Arab nations were born but did not choose democracy. Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, all founded in 1946. As a guest explained in a previous episode, they were all founded by the same act of decolonization that led to the foundation of Israel. Powerful reminder that people who tried to call Israel a colonialist power are literally the exact opposite of correct. Like, you can be slightly off or you can be exactly off. They are exactly wrong. Anyway, amid all this, the founders of Israel, amazingly, chose to be a democracy, the only one in MENA, Middle East and North Africa. Here's a clip about that from episode 15. You'll hear me play something from one of the most beloved U.S. journalists in history.
The largest group of people in Israel come from Arab nations where they were never treated as equal citizens and were subjected to all kinds of separate rules and then pogroms and had to flee for their lives. No one made the founders of Israel choose democracy. When it was founded, people in the news understood how precious democracy is. Here is a news clip from 1948.
Amidst the rumblings of battle, the ceremonial ram's horn, the shofar, was heard. And after 2,000 years, Israel was reborn.
This is the famed broadcaster Edward R. Murrow.
You are listening to the hymn Hatikva, as it was broadcast from Tel Aviv just a few moments after the proclamation of Israel's independence.
וקראתם דרור בארץ לכל יושביה.
In English, proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all the inhabitants thereof. Those identical words from the Old Testament appear on the Liberty Bell in Independence Hall, Philadelphia.
It took a defensive war to establish that democracy, too. Of course, you wouldn't know that from the anti-democratic revisionist history going on, in which the people who fought for Israel's independence to end its era of being controlled by various colonialist powers, including the Arab Muslim Empire, are being depicted as the bad guys. All that is an anti-democratic effort. I think all the time about U.S. service members who paved the way for the freedoms we have in the United States. For my freedom to do this, to communicate with you, unafraid that the government will come punish me, or that my neighbors will turn me into some Gestapo or KGB or Islamist force and try to kill me for it. This freedom was achieved through war. And these hate mongers downplaying the threats to democracy on the far right and the far left, they are pushing us toward the downfall of this gift that service members gave us. The media tells you none of this because they don't know or don't care, and because many of them have been infiltrated in ways similar to what FDR talked about. There were giant pro-Nazi rallies and marches at the time. There were pro-Nazi journalists in the New York Times and other big media outlets, openly, proudly pro-Nazi. Today, in the media, there are people who are pushing pro-Russian agendas, particularly right-wing media. There are people who support Islamist authoritarian governments in the mainstream media. And there is this infiltration, like by Iran and Qatar. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's literal. Look at the former Al Jazeera employees in high-ranking positions at major U.S. news agencies. Al Jazeera is Qatar's state-owned propaganda giant. Qatar, an anti-democratic, authoritarian nation has its propaganda being piped into the United States all the time. Note to journalists, if you truly believe these slain U.S. service members were heroes, then stop to think about whether they would be proud of you downplaying or ignoring the anti-democratic threats of today. Stop to think about the lesson that evil anti-democratic regimes must be thoroughly defeated, including by fighting back in war. Coming up, a president's warning about the military-industrial complex. We all know that another big association Americans have with Memorial Day is shopping. There are all kinds of Memorial Day deals. So I am joining the tradition. And for Memorial Day, I have a discount for you. Anyone who chooses to become a paid subscriber to the newsletter will find that the annual plan is a little bit cheaper than it is usually. So now is the chance to jump on that. Also, the people who do the most to make this show possible are the founding members. These are folks who are supporting the show at a higher level and getting additional perks. The rate for that is set to a really meaningful figure as well. Check out the links in the show notes or go to my website, joshlebs.com, and click on newsletter. Another part of honoring the legacy of military heroes is understanding that the United States should not be attacking anywhere that is not presenting threats. Trump recently said he would not rule out military force to take over Greenland and Panama. Americans need to know about this, too, and need to understand how awful it is. President Dwight D. Eisenhower spoke to this idea when he gave his farewell address in 1961.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Knowledgeable citizenry. The media should be providing us with the two things it takes to know and understand truth: facts plus context. For the record, Eisenhower and FDR did not have ideal relationships with the press. There was, of course, a push-pull, and a lot of journalists at the time could tell you the ways in which they were not being open enough. And yet, look at how far we've fallen. We have a president now who has literally called the press the enemy of the state. The press is not the enemy. Here's an important reminder. You and I and everyone supporting this show, we love the role of a free media in society. We want it to do its job, to stand for truth, to empower Americans with knowledge so they can understand what's really going on, especially in the battle for democracy here at home and around the world. On Memorial Day, we commemorate all service members who died during times of war and peace, people who took on the tasks that our country assigned them to protect our way of life, to protect freedom and democracy. Sergeant Jason Covey of the U.S. Air Force playing taps at Culpeper National Cemetery in Virginia. To all who fought for our country, you are remembered. Thank you. To everyone who has lost someone in service to this country, thank you as well. I hope the media will take this to heart and stop what it's doing. Instead, start carrying on the legacy of the fight for democracy to lead the free world, a fight against fascists and authoritarian governments, whether they be communist or Islamist, a fight for truth and justice. As always, thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week.